Welcome. You are listening to The Travel Winds, hosted by Pete Kotzbach. This is a weekly interview show about people who travel for work and all the ups and downs that go along with it. Here we go.
Welcome to The Travel Winds. I'm excited to share probably one of the most well-traveled persons I've met in 240 plus episodes. He's a director, producer, filmmaker, husband, dad. He's got a lot going on. Paul Taublieb. How are you today, Paul?
Fantastic. Very excited to talk about something that's been a big part of my life, but you never really get to talk about it except complaining. So it's fun to talk to about the culture of it. So
exactly.
Like I said, as I mentioned, I have about 1.7 million miles on United alone, and there's other flights. So I have a little bit of experience.
I'm going to do the math on that and figure out, 500 miles per hour. How many hours?
I'd love to know.
I'll figure that out. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, you'll see behind Paul, he's an Emmy award winning producer, director, movie maker. I'm just looking at, we got 4 up there. Yeah, it looks like it.
4, yeah.
I actually knew of you before Groundswell. I didn't
really,
but I didn't know your name. Meaning I watched Unchained, I watched Legend of Eddie, and I was like, these are just phenomenal documentaries that
thank you.
That you turned it all of a sudden. I meet you for Groundswell, and I'm like, oh my God, I know this guy's work. This is awesome.
That's very kind of you. It's very exciting.
I met you at the Groundswell premiere, and obviously Bianca and Tori and some of the other people that were involved with the movie. How cool is it that not a typical New Yorker story doing action sports hunting in California? How'd that all start?
There's been no plans to my career. It has been bumbling forward chaotically, sort of, just sort of whatever's come along. I was a surfer growing up in New York a long time ago, when surfing was still considered kind of counterculture, rebellious, and so on. And that was really the trigger to my career and my trigger to travel, because I lived in New York where the surf's not that good. And you'd see exotic pictures from all over the world.
Yeah.
And wanting to catch better waves, it would start getting me on the road and going on all kinds of adventures. And it led me, when I got to college, as an English major, as a writer, I actually spent a year hitchhiking and traveling throughout Africa and the Indian Ocean.
Oh, wow.
Overland.
A summer kind of deal.
Yeah, kind of like that. I mean, I drove across the Sahara Desert, went into West Africa, had run-ins with witch doctors and canoes going down the Ubangi River, and then a freighter out to the Indian Ocean. And the funny story was, I was surfing in Morocco, and then I was with a couple of guys who weren't surfers, and then we were driving down through Africa. And in those days, when you went across the Sahara, there was no road; there was just tracks out there. But one person of the group would sit on the roof of the car with binoculars, looking in the distance to see dust. Because if you could see dust in the distance, that was another car coming towards you. And you'd go, okay, aim for that guy, and he'll tell you where to go. And we would tell him the landmarks the other direction.
I gotcha.
So I'm on top of the van driving along, and I say, oh, there's some dust. And I know I have a surfboard on my car in the desert. And I come across another guy with a surfboard on his car in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So, of course, as surfers, where did you surf? Where did you go? I told him I had just been surfing in Morocco, and he told me about this little island called Mauritius, which I had never heard of, which is very far away from Algeria, where we were. But it kind of, the romance, when he told me about this incredible place, I said, I need to go there. And so not only did I then end up getting there months later, but I had given him the name of my parents back in New York. Now, this is before cell phones.
I was going to say.
So this guy shows up in New York a couple months later with the Pony Express. I saw your son in the desert. He's doing great. So they were like, that was the nature of an update. So some stranger stayed with my parents for 3 weeks and visited New York, and they were thrilled.
To hear you were still alive.
To hear I'm still alive, though it was months delayed. And then eventually I ended up getting, what happened was the Jeep I was in was wrecked. And I ended up, it's a long story, of course, but there was a group, this was in Central African Republic, and there was a van going on its way to Nairobi, which is where I was heading.
Wow.
So I said, look, I have a tape deck that I can't use anymore because our truck was ruined. I go, I'll give you all these tapes and all this music if you'll take my surfboard to the American Embassy in Nairobi. And I said, I'll tell them I'll be there in 3 or 4 months. So I stick my board on this Jeep. They go off. I end up 3 or 4 months later hitchhiking through Africa. I have a beard like this, and I walk into the American Embassy in Nairobi. And I say, by any chance, did someone drop off a surfboard here? And there's this little old lady from Iowa or whatever with the blue hair and the glasses. She goes, oh, yes, we've been waiting for you. It's here in the broom closet. And there was my surfboard in the broom closet. And I was able to pick it up and then get on a freighter and go out to Mauritius and surf out there.
Do you think that could happen nowadays?
No.
Yeah.
I do not think people are walking into the American Embassy with surfboards.
With the surfboard thing, I'm going to leave this here.
Yeah, I think I was lucky. It was an, and also Africa has changed a lot. I mean, maybe you could still go trans-Africa, but I think it would be a challenge.
Yeah, I always get amazed when I hear stories like that, because it makes me think, the younger people are going to hear this and go, well, why didn't you just look on your phone and find GPS and find out if you're going? It's like, no, there were no phones. There's no GPS. There's no maps. There's no.
Yeah, no, like I remember when we were in the Ubangi River, the 2 guys I was with both got sick with malaria, and I was on a different medication. So I was just fortunate not to get sick. And we had a dugout canoe that we got hustled. We bought a canoe from some Africans. We had to buy bubble gum and chew it and stick it in the holes because it was leaking so bad. But, you had your backpack with your food and your passport, and that was your lifeline. You were like a spaceman. If you lost your identification in the middle of Africa,
You were done.
You're a young guy walking around, they would assume you're a criminal or a mercenary. Like, you had to be, and there's no one to call. There's no way to get anywhere, so it was a different era.
It really, and it's not that long ago.
No, the world, change is a rapid thing, but it's.
That's why, I still, every once in a while, I'll put Endless Summer on just to see them going through Africa and all that. And I'm like, wow, it's just.
Well, that was the movie that started my life.
Sure.
Little kid, my parents, at first to their regret for a long time, was because I saw that movie. And when you're a little kid, anybody over 15 is considered like it's an adult.
An adult,
right?
yeah.
So here's my dad, the guy who had made it out of the ghetto of New York and the Lower East Side, made it to Long Island, to the suburbs, raising a typical, post-World War II Jewish family there. And they took me to this movie just on a lark.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, when I grow up, I don't want to be an accountant. That didn't seem very exciting because I just see his work with the cross footing and everything. So I said, I'll be a surfer. And I was a swimmer at the time. So I just decided to become a surfer, having not even surfed.
Yeah.
And then I eventually found my way to the beach and so on. And then that started, and I saw them traveling all over the world.
Yeah.
And I said, I didn't realize that wasn't a job. I thought, oh, they're grownups. They just go surfing. I guess they get money too. But that's really what inspired my whole life. One of the funny story about that was years and years later. So I went to a film festival where I won an award for a motorcycle thing, and Bruce Brown's movie, The Endless Summer, is what inspired my whole life and really has gone. So I went up to him all excited to thank him for inspiring me. And he's at the bar with a cigarette and a drink. And I said, Mr. Brown, I want to thank. He goes, not another one of you surfers who's telling me how much you watch the movie. I know. Get out of here. Which I thought was much more charming than, the typical thank you. He just was a cranky old man. And it was kind of wonderful to see that he wasn't taken by himself or that he wasn't full of himself. He was still just the crazy old filmmaker that he always was. So anyway, surfing, filmmaking, travel have all been together for me. And, the Big Wave movie you think about travel, like when we were shooting Big Waves, it's a situation where, look, I don't go surf big waves, so don't give me any credit for being courageous. But on a business standpoint, I need to have a crew, hotels, travel, cameramen, big financial decision based on a surf forecast. And as great as the forecasting is, and it's really good, and have a particular guy who's the best, you're rolling the dice.
Yeah.
And you have like a week out, you get like a flashing yellow light, maybe that's a week, and your life's going on.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 3 days out. I hopped on the plane. I went to Nazaré when we got that amazing footage. And, I arrived jet lagged. And as simple as it seems, you have to figure out where you're placing your cameras. And I was ahead of my crew. You know how the Apple Watch keeps track of your steps? I did 35,000 steps walking around Nazaré, scouting the angles, not sleeping. Then the crew comes in, get a few hours of sleep. We're up before dawn, getting the cameras in place, getting everything. That place was particularly complicated because you had one camera crew coming out of a harbor, had 2 other camera crews up on the hill and, coordinating everything and getting them food and water and batteries and PAs running around. And I don't speak Portuguese. And
Yeah, exactly.
and you have one day. The swell lasts a day.
Yeah.
So that's all you got. And so it's, you're just rolling the dice. So it's the nature of it. It's exciting, but very stressful.
Well, like in Unchained, it's very specific, right? I mean, you could have weather, I guess, but for the most part, you know where it's going to be. It's a very controlled environment, and you go, and
yeah.
But with waves, it's not.
It is not. And I did a shoot in Australia a few years ago. A big swell was coming, and there were 2 locations. They were maybe 6 hours apart. So one crew went to one, I went to another, and we got amazing waves. The other guys got completely skunked, that the tide was wrong. And the biggest danger you have when swells are generated by storms 1,000 miles away. So if you know there's a big storm, that swell is coming. You don't have to worry about that. But what you have to worry about is the angle of it and really the local winds, that's microclimates. So you may have a sunny West Coast, but has it been cloudy down there where you are down Manhattan Beach?
It's terrible here. Yeah. Terrible.
Same, well, actually we have sun finally today, but that you could be coming to LA to shoot something and all of a sudden, and that wind, that cloudy creates an onshore flow of wind, a bad wind. So you can't control that. You roll the dice, and that's just the nature of the animal. When you're chasing big waves around the world.
Yeah, I interviewed Gabby Reese, married to Laird Hamilton, and she said, "I said, what are some of the big wave issues that you've had in your marriage?" She goes, "Laird has something in his contract whenever he signs with anybody that he's given. If there's a big wave anywhere in the world, you have to give him a week off.
Yeah."
And if you don't like that part of the contract, he won't sign with you.
Yeah.
He's like, they have to chase it that way.
Yeah, I did some work with a guy named Shane Dorian, who is arguably one of the best big wave guys. And we interviewed his wife, and she goes, "How come every big swell comes on my birthday, Mother's Day, kids' birthdays, graduations? Like, how does that happen every time?" But
Magic.
Yeah, and for the surfers, not so much for me. Imagine having to be physically at the top of your game all the time, because you never know. It's not like you train like weekly or pre-season. You don't have a football player's week to recovery and plan.
Right.
You need to be ready to risk your life at the highest possible levels with very little warning. So it's very stressful, but that's the life. That's what's involved. So
and I think that Tori talking about being a bull rider is kind of that same mentality, like jumping on it.
Yeah, but exactly. So but so it's I'm trying to think, what else did you want to talk about with travel, since it's
I was going to ask you, I know you have children. How have you been able to kind of balance the home life, kids, and then your job makes you travel? I mean, how have you balanced that over the years?
This may sound kind of horrible. I might end up getting nasty letters from someone, but my family understands my job.
Yeah.
And in a way, once I leave the house, I kind of turn it off. I'm not one of these guys that gets on the phone and gets on the FaceTime for hours on end. I touch base. I've just found, for me and kind of for the family, it's like I make sure they know I'm okay.
Yeah.
But by the same token, it's like I'm gone. I'm in like a work mode usually, or in the case of I'm leaving Sunday for Indonesia to go surfing, I'm in a surfing mode, and the time zones are always different, and everything's different, and my mind is different, and I'm kind of in this focused, type thing. So over the years they've gotten used to it, and I would say I kind of go absent. I don't, it seems to work better than this halfway connection, which is not really a connection. Again, I do stay in touch. I do call once to know I'm okay, but I don't spend hours on the phone, on FaceTime and checking in. It's kind of like I'm off to my new life and you're still living yours.
Do you feel that when you're home, you're more present though?
Exactly.
At least for me, I mean. Yeah.
That's correct.
I mean, I know when I'm the same. I'm kind of the same. I tell my daughters, well, I can tell you, I work at the rodeo every year in Vegas. I'm there for 16 straight days. And I go, look, I'm available at night, but I'm working during the day. Like,
exactly.
It better be important for you to call me.
And also,
I've gotten one call in 13 years.
and hopefully it was important. Oh, also, my wife used to call me up with questions about stuff I couldn't do anything about. Like,
No
what
comment.
the gardening or the this or the, I go, what you're telling me it's a problem. I can't solve it. So I go, just don't even tell me. But she probably has a completely different view of it. But
Yeah. We'll talk to her next.
if she swings by, I'll grab her. But it's what I will say though, COVID was kind of interesting because I've been doing this travel for a long time on a consistent basis. Always that chasing that, the elite status. Like one year I was 464 miles short of 100,000 miles.
Trying to think about go Salt Lake City.
Went to San Luis Obispo.
There you go. Yeah.
And I called up United and I go, can I just, it's 464 miles. I mean, and then after 15, 20 years, and they go, well, sorry, we can't do it. So I got on the plane and flew to San Luis, had a cup of coffee and flew home. Okay. But every year it seems to, like I said, I have some big travel coming up now. And I'm kind of excited. I get to be business class on Singapore on the flight on Sunday. And so that should be a nice airline experience. The last trip I made though was on Philippines Airlines, which I would say do not go on this airline. On my way home, I get off the airplane. I'm tired. I've been traveling because there was a number of planes involved to get to to Manila. And and I see transfer on my ticket. And it was a low-level new person. And she sent me into a holding cell with guys with machine guns and all these people who were like refugees. And I'm not a refugee. I have like a business class ticket and I'm just trying to get home. And I'm in this room and I go, I have to get out of here. And they go, no, you can't.
And they weren't kidding.
They weren't kidding. And I had to say, let's get the embassy on the phone. We're going to have to get on top of this right away. And eventually I talked my way out of the room, but it was kind of spooky, and the airline was terrible. I don't recommend Philippine Airlines. Manila is a madhouse of an airport.
Yeah.
So it was not a good travel experience.
Well, let me ask you this question then. Out of all the places you've traveled, what's the most influential place you've been to?
In terms of a travel location, influential.
I've gotten really random answers on this question, so.
I don't know, what popped into my mind is all I can answer was going to France on my honeymoon. And I was, and France has good surf. So we get to the beach at Biarritz, and I realized this is a big mistake because when I'm in the surf mode, I'm like thinking wind,
I'm surfing,
right? So I look up, I go, we got to get out of here because my marriage is going to be ruined on the honeymoon. And are you familiar with the Relais Chateau train of hotels?
No.
It's actually not a chain. It's a designation. If you're in this thing called Relais Chateau, RELAIX Chateau, it's a collection of the best hotels in the world. And there's hundreds you have to, only elite hotels get into this organization, get this stamp. So I looked up Relais Chateau and I found a hotel in the Pyrenees inland from France. And we found from a travel experience from being like, I was also disappointed in Biarritz. It's kind of a ticky-tacky town, which I didn't realize it would be, to this beautiful hotel up in the mountains where Nouvelle cuisine was invented.
Wow.
So Michel Richard was the chef. So it was just days of luxurious French food, sitting in white mud with there was a Nigerian princess there, this 300-pound woman sitting in the white mud next to you. And, just beautiful food. So I would say it was just, and to this day, I get credit for leaving the ocean and 30 years later, my wife still talks about the wonderful meals and this beautiful French chateau. And, that can only happen with travel, only those kinds of things. And I would also say where I'm going on Sunday, I'm going to fly LA, Singapore, Jakarta, overnight in Jakarta, then go to a place called Padang in West Sumatra, then get on a charter to the Tello Islands, and then a boat ride out to the surf resort. So a lot of travel.
How many hours is that going to be?
Well, I spend a day in Jakarta, so that kind of, but it's like 20 hours to Jakarta, overnight in Jakarta, and then about 5 hours to get the other legs through there. But it's when you get in that little charter plane, because I did it a year ago, and you're flying low and you see the islands and you see the waves bending in. And what was really interesting there, we're beginning again about the beauty of travel. We're on a little remote island with just this high-end surf resort. People take care of you. Really, really a nice place. That's why we're going back.
Yeah.
But the town across the harbor, across the channel, called Tello Town. One of the most fascinating places I've ever been. It's a small Indonesian town, and there's 4 major religions within a town of like 10,000 people. So there's a Buddhist monastery, there's a Catholic church, there's a Protestant church, and there was something else, an Islamic mosque, all in this little town. And the funny part was, so we had a day off, the surf wasn't good, and so I decided to walk through the town for the day, and it's bustling. There's people going back and forth. It's a little bustling little town. I'm thinking, first of all, why are these people in a rush? You're in a little, relax a little bit. But here was the funny part. All of a sudden I go, I recognize that woman. The people were just zipping back and forth in the town, going nowhere. They were just like, they would stop, get a soda, drive to the end of the town. And as I spent 3 hours walking around, I kind of knew everybody. But it felt like this bustling, but it was amazing to see all these cultures so close together.
Yeah.
Getting along, and you'd see people, churches and, beautiful places. And so it was one of those sort of little magical moments that you come across in travel, which is the only time that happens.
Yeah, I feel that way when I go to New York. I'm California, right? So I was like, I go to New York City and I'm like, just going from Queens to Brooklyn's and then go to the Bronx, and you're like, they're like different cities within. It's a different.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about travel, I'm sort of thinking about it philosophically, for me anyway, particularly airplanes, because I have this, when someone says you have a 19-hour flight coming up, it's a long flight, no doubt about it. But I think over the years I've been trained, I wouldn't call it a Zen state, but you realize you can't, right now, like, for example, as we're sitting here, I'm getting texts for like, pick this up and I can pick a prescription, it's that constant barrage, but it's almost like being on a boat.
Nothing you can do.
Nothing you can do. Your world is very small. So, I'm looking at the window here and the world is big. And so your context is you feel small, but in a small environment, the world is now containable. So maybe that's part of the relaxing part of it is, having a small little world for a little while.
For me, I'll tell you, when I'm home, it's I got to get to the dentist. I got to get the car fixed. I got to do grocery shop. Oh, I got to do that honeydew project. I got to go to the hardware store. I got to get that. When you're on a plane for 6 hours, 13 hours, 17, 30 hours, there's nothing to do other than what you're there for. Exactly.
And I still have not, I've tried every jet lag gimmick in the book.
I was going to ask you.
And I just got a new app. I'm a sucker for TikTok, by the way. So I watch it all the time. And there's a new app that I haven't done yet, but I bought it for whatever it is, called Time Shifter. And supposedly you enter your flight information into it and where you are, and then it gives you not a sleep and a caffeine pattern to follow.
Oh, nice.
Apparently it's, when to open the blinds, because it knows your flights, where you're going to be.
Yeah.
And it builds a plan for you to follow along in terms of food. If you want to drink, what do you want to do? So I'm going to try that one because I get it pretty bad.
I do too. I was just talking about that, and I was just, even like, I just went to Nashville, but then I had to drive over to Knoxville. So Nashville's Central Time, but Knoxville's Eastern Standard Time.
Oh, that's funny.
And so, I fly in at 8 and then 9, and you got to go back, and then I got to make sure I check back in an hour before because I got to drive back, and it's just one of those weird things. And I'm with you on the jet lag. Even when I go to Hawaii, it hits me.
Yeah, absolutely. And last time I went to Indonesia, I got it. Well, 2 days before I was coming back, we had to plan a shoot. Something came up from a client to make a video. We actually shot it at my house, and it was a night shoot. So after not sleeping, I get home and I have to stay up all night in my backyard shooting a promotional video. So I've struggled with it, and it can last a while. And I now sort of like, I know on this next trip, when I come back for a few days, it's going to be a little bit tough in terms of that. But I kind of can't imagine my life without travel. Though during COVID, when you couldn't really travel very
Yeah.
much, and I still snuck away a few times. Just as an aside, I have a friend who's an Israeli, who's a very wealthy guy. And he at the beginning of COVID, when panic was running rampant, he got this mask from Israel that looked like an underwater Bell helmet scuba tank that was designed for chemical attacks in Israel, a very expensive deal. And he said, I got an extra one of these things. So it was like this Bell helmet I put on with like this breathing apparatus. And I get on the plane and put it on. And first of all, the stewardesses are like freaking out. I look like I'm the Martian, but it fogs up. So, I'm like, I'm probably safe, but I can't see.
I won't be able to know.
I can't do this. I go, can you get a little cloth mask for me now? So I took thousands of dollars worth of headgear in order to be able to read and watch movies and whatnot.
You'd think with all that money, they would have come up with a anti-fog
windshield wipers or something.
Exactly.
It didn't work, but it was funny. It took my wife a little while to adjust for me never leaving. When you do 100,000 miles a year in productions, you're coming. And as you know, when you kind of come home, it's kind of nice. It's kind of fun and it's refreshing. There's a little bit of a, absent makes the heart grow fond. And but now she goes, there you are again. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
I went from 150 days on the road to home every day,
A lot. Wow.
So, oh God, musicians are so much worse. I talked to one musician, he's on the road 300 days a year.
That's just unbelievable.
I am like, that's 10 months of the year. But, but during COVID, all of a sudden you're home. And I was the same way. It's like, my wife's like, it's nice, but it's kind of nice when you're gone for a week or whatever,
I know.
I get all my stuff done. I'm like, I know, I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's funny because when a marriage is like someone once explained it to me, a marriage is like a deal. You make and you say you're going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then you fall into the deal, like expectations and whatever. And suddenly, when people like us travel a lot and we don't, the deal changes.
Yeah,
it's not what they are used to, and not what their deal was. And at least for my wife, it's like, you're here again. I mean, I love you, but you're still around here.
And you're starting to mess up my rhythm. Yeah,
exactly. And but it's been, I have to say, I can't imagine when I tell people like yourself who travel so much and you talk to people who basically don't go anywhere, it sure seems weird to me to not see the world and not have that sense of getting off the plane and that moment of, it's anxiety and excitement and, navigating. I'll tell you one funny story. So a friend of mine who I travel with surfing all the time, his wife was like, he was getting, we're not the youngest surfers in the world, and his wife was hoping that he was going to give up surfing and come along. And so now we're back.
Not going to happen.
So one night we go out. So I said to him, look, let's get the wives together. We'll go to dinner and we'll just sort of, create like a bonding thing. He does the worst possible thing. Because as a traveler, you're experienced, the way to deal with the counter, all the things. And I'm pretty good at that kind of, I got to tell you a story about Africa that'll blow your mind. My favorite travel story. Now that you mentioned it, I'll tell you a miracle that took place. So at dinner, he goes, oh yes. And this goes, and Paul is just the greatest guy to travel with. So that pissed his wife off.
Sure.
So bad. He goes,
what do you mean, Paul?
I thought he going, So here's a great travel story. We were doing a piece years ago about what we thought we were doing an exploration to an island in West Africa where supposedly there was an indigenous surf community that had developed surfing on its own. Someone had been there. They witnessed guys on wooden surfboards. Was it real surfing? Where did it come from? I got some little bit of money to go to this little island to go to research. Was surfing born in Africa organically?
I got you.
It was kind of an interesting idea. The movie later was called The Lost Wave. So there was 3 professional surfers, 2 cameramen, a director, and myself and an assistant with lots of gear. And this was in the days before digital. So we brought all tape, all boxes and boxes. We had no idea, so we brought lots of tape. So we changing planes in Belgium. I walk up to the counter. And I remember we had 27 bags plus surfboards for like 6 or 7 of us. And the woman looks down and the woman, my assistant, is standing next to me, and she was brand new. She was from somewhere in like Newport Beach, very fair-skinned girl with red hair and very innocent. This whole thing was bewildering to her. She had never been overseas. And now she's my assistant dealing with all this stuff. I walk up to the counter and the woman goes, and she's Belgian. And the Belgians are not very nice. They're kind of, like the French. What is this? No way. We do not take 27 bags. This is not going to happen. No, 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 no. So I don't know where this came from. Without missing a beat, I said to the woman, do you know what's in those bags? And she goes, no. I go, that's medicine for the children. And it just came. And Katie, her face turned so red.
I bet.
It starts coming down. The woman turns to her and goes, are you okay, miss? Like, it was so odd. And she's trying not to laugh. One of the surfers is standing next to me. I look at him, his eyes are big. And she goes, oh, for the children? No problem, no fees. We take it all, take it all. And so we loaded everything onto the plane, paid no extra money for it. And they called it the Miracle in Brussels. And then, so that's how we got to this island called, and the place we went to, by the way, you're a traveled man, but have you ever heard of a country called Sao Tome?
Sao Tome, no.
It's an independent nation in the United Nations called Sao Tome y Principe. It is a little country off the coast of Gabon in West Africa. And that's where we went and found this group of indigenous surfers. The other crazy story, so when we finally get into this area, we're in a little charter plane. And we had chartered it. We get there and the plane's going around this field and the guy starts circling this field with tall grass and no runway. And I happened to be sitting in the co-pilot seat because there was no room. And I'm looking, what is going on? The guy's, leaning the plane over, circling and circling. And all of a sudden I'm going, where's he going? There's just nothing there. The guy starts going in for the landing. I'm thinking he's lost his mind, to die. He lays the plane down, gets cuts through the grass. And I go, what was that about, man? You were going, he goes, oh, I have to scare the lions away. They lay in the grass. And this is, so that's why I go around a bunch of times. Then on the way home, the plane couldn't pick up. They could only drop us off. So we get up in the morning, we take a Jeep to a little island where there were baby chimpanzees. It was a nature island. They go, you guys can play with these chimpanzees. So we're all sweaty.
Yeah.
Little monkeys. We're all playing with the monkeys. They're stinky little creatures. We're having a great time. Then we get in a boat. Then we get in another thing. And we end up at this airport at night out on the runway. They drive us out there. And I got camera gears, expensive cameras, and the tape that we shot of, we found the kid and we discovered this tribe and all this. And we're out on the tarmac. And this car pulls up. That's where this guy said to go. And there's guys there with guns, or army guys. They go, leave everything here. We'll load it on the plane. And I'm like, no. We're going to check in. I want my tickets. And they go, no, you don't worry. The plane is right there. We'll take care of it. And I'm like, no, I need to check it in. Then the guy picks the gun up and goes, no, you leave it here. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Now you got to remember, I have not showered all day. I've been going through the jungle, playing with chimps. Now I'm starting to sweat. I'm in the middle, it's equatorial, right on the equator. It's really hot. And the guy goes, nope, go into the airport. So I go in, we check in, I tell the people, they go, oh, don't worry, they'll put it on the plane. But I think I'm screwed. This whole flight, I'm going to Munich actually to change planes. And we're supposed to pick up our baggage. So you can imagine what we smelled like. There was like 8 of them.
Yeah.
And then I'm having this cold, nervous sweat now going, what am I going to do when I get the cameras and gear? Everything's gone. How am I going to explain this? I don't have insurance. The network's going to kill me. So I had this horrible flight. We get to Munich and the bags start coming out. And until we're the only ones left and everybody is gone. And I figured we are just screwed.
Yeah.
And one by one, the bags come, except for the box with the tape that we had shot. And then the thing goes around. And now I have a cold sweat. I'm drenched in, covered in, you can imagine. And now I'm in a freezing cold airport. I'm flop sweating, panic sweat. And then the box finally came out and we ended up getting the documentary. But that was not one of the happier trips I've ever had.
That's too much stress all the way around.
It was so much stress. And that was just not one of those that, that was one of those in my business where we'd hired a director. I had hired a director I didn't know too well. And it turned out he went crazy and the cameraman wouldn't listen to him. So we had a crew that wouldn't talk to each other for a week. And I had to have the director talk to me. I had to talk to the camera guys. And it was just one of these, that whole trip was just one of those, one nightmare after another, but we ended up with a nice little kind of small documentary out of it. And, but that's what happened. You know, there's a famous saying, and here's just another crazy travel. I'm going to tell you the craziest story you've ever heard.
Okay.
Okay. So we're in Sao Tome, and Sao Tome was a Portuguese island that in the 90s, the Cubans came in and said, overthrow your corporate, your overlords, your colonial overlords, and you should become a socialist country.
Right.
But the economy collapsed because you can't do farming on a small level when you have to do mass farming. And it was chocolate. It was the main product from there. To this day, you can get Sao Tome chocolate. So there were these abandoned factories everywhere that had been fallen into ruin, into disrepair. So the last day of the shoot, I grabbed the camera guy, I go, let's go to the factory and get shots of beams of light coming through on the old broken down equipment with the roofs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we're in this broken down factory, and all of a sudden I notice people walking in, and this is a poor country, but they're like in their best clothes. You could just see and they were clean. There was something special, and I see them walking into this room. So I follow them into the room, and it's a pristine white room. And at the front is a little pulpit. It's a church carved into the building. But that's not the interesting part. On the wall is a menorah, a giant blue menorah, and a blue Star of David. And I'm thinking, the Star of David, I might not have raised alarms because maybe a star is a star, even though white and blue are the Jewish colors, right? But a menorah is a freaking menorah. Like there's no mistaking design. So I just can't figure it. And the church, though, is a Catholic service. So we get back to our camp, and I say to our fixer, our translator, hey, dude, I just saw a menorah and a Jewish star on the wall of a church in an abandoned factory. What is going on here? He goes, well, this, you're Jewish. I go, yes. He goes, you must know the story of the Jewish slave children of Sao Tome. I go, the what? The Jewish? I never heard of this. He goes, no, everybody knows that story. I go, well, I never heard of it.
Yeah.
It's the actual true story of the craziest story you'll ever hear. In the 1600s, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Spain and Portugal. The king of Spain was killing all of his Jews. But at the same time, he wanted to marry his daughter to the son of the king of Portugal. And he goes, but the terms of the marriage is, he said to the king of Portugal, you have to also murder all of your Jews. Then our kids can marry and we'll have peace. So the king of Portugal scratches his chin, I'm making that up, of course, and says, I don't really mind killing all the Jews. That's not a problem. But I've got this island called Sao Tome filled with these Africans who are not educated. They're disorganized. They're slaves, but they're not doing a really good job. I know what I'll do. I will kill all the parents and then send the Jewish kids to Sao Tome to intermarry with the Africans. So I'll get this workforce to marry with these, intellectual Jewish kids, and I'll create a super race on my little private island. And this is so how the story came to be found out was many years later, hundreds of years later, when they were trying to dig out the harbor in Sao Tome, they came across massive collection of bones. Nobody knew what it was. So someone investigates and finds the bones are African bones, from Africa, and Caucasian bones. You can tell there's differences. And then they went to the church and they found the account of this whole story of what had happened. And when the Jews got to Sao Tome and they were being whipped and told to do all this stuff, they got together with the Africans and said, fuck this, let's overthrow these guys.
Yeah.
And then the Portuguese had the army and they slaughtered hundreds of people and put them in a mass grave together. And that's what was discovered. And that's how the story came out. So that's the story of the Jewish slave children of Sao Tome, which has never been told.
And it's just like completely random that you happen to be there at the time they were going there. So you could, that's pretty random.
And just seeing that on the wall triggered me asking questions. And that's what led to me now. And I've actually tried to develop it into a documentary and into a feature film. And I've talked to a lot of different people, but it is just such an outrageously depressing and horrific story that there's really no way to tell it in a, any kind of a manner. But anyways, that's the kind of thing, like you talk about travel.
Yeah.
if you're inquisitive and you know, if your mind is open and you ask questions and you pay attention, the world is an interesting, complex place.
I was gonna say, that's what benefited me when I travel, because now I always look, like if I go to Louisville, I'm like, well, what's around Louisville? What's happening there? And then I'll go to the Muhammad Ali Museum, or I'll go to the Louisville Bat Company. And then you go to the Louisville Bat Company and you find out that they have a batting cage inside the factory.
Yeah.
And you can use the exact specs of Babe Ruth's bat, or Sam Musial, or Mickey Mantle's.
Oh,
They have
cool.
their bats, you know, but it's making the time to go out and see things other than just, I'm here for work and now I'm going home.
Now, one of the flip sides of that, in terms of the surf world, which I'm very involved with, as you know,
Yeah.
is you could make an argument that surfers are some of the biggest vanguards of adventure travel. So
They
you
have
look
to
at Costa Rica as an example. When I went there in the 70s and 80s, there was nothing there. But surfers will go anywhere there's waves. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter how. Look what I'm doing. Going to I told you this crazy trip I'm taking to the Tello Islands, just to ride waves. But what often follows is not really a wonderful thing, because surfers are kind of selfish. They want waves. They bring crowds. These small places are not set up. There's
Yeah.
little villages that become overwhelmed. And suddenly you have places in Bali is a perfect example, which I've never been to Bali. You know, it was pioneered by surfers. That whole
Yeah.
world of Bali was guys in the 70s chasing waves, and movies would come out. And that whole culture, that whole now gigantic travel world. And from what I understand, you know, it's overrun, and Kuta's filled with millions of bars. And it tends to grow quickly and without a lot of control. And you have a lot of people trying to capitalize on, you know, these people coming in.
The culture. Yeah, absolutely.
It creates surf ghettos and problems within communities. I know of a story of a guy who put a resort in a remote island in Sumba, part of Indonesia. And he hired a bunch of people from the village to work at his resort. And then one day someone comes to him and says, your life is in danger. You need to be careful, and you need to go talk to the chief of the village. The guy goes, I don't have, what am I? I'm just hiring people. Well, by him hiring people who are very poor in a remote part of Indonesia, he became more powerful than the chief, because the chief was just a ceremonial, you know, leader based on the fact that he was the big guy in town. This other guy was paying people money who could then have independence, didn't have to follow the chief's orders. So the chief was really mad. And for people who didn't have a job at the resort, they
power,
really
yeah.
And they had stockpiled weapons, and they were planning an attack to murder everybody at the resort. When he finally went to them and then realized, I have to hire the chief and pay him just to be the chief, and let him distribute the money and let him run how the money is distributed. Otherwise, you know, I could get killed out here in this little island. So that's, you know, that's one of the crazy things that happens when, you know, surf travel, you're not always sensitive to the local, you know, environment.
I was going to say, you know, with your films, that's got to be something. I mean, you can't account for that. I mean, you can't go, oh, there's probably a chief there that's going to be upset that I'm paying people, you know.
No,
but I mean, you have to respond to that, right?
Yeah, you have to be, when you walk into, particularly when you're in remote places, you realize really big, you know, if you're one of those Americans or the typical pushy, aggressive traveler, you will get in trouble very quickly. Yeah. And if you're not aware of your surroundings and the vibe in the street and what the people are like and giving off the right vibes, you will invite trouble. But so you have to realize you're a guest, look around, you know, don't walk through people's yards just because you're there, particularly with surf. Oh, there's a wave. I'm going to go here. I'm going to do this. In Samoa, for example, where I've also gone to surf. I've been to a lot of places surfing. On Sundays, it's a very religious place. So you're allowed to surf right in front of your resort, but you cannot go to other places because they take their Sundays very seriously. And if you go traipsing through a village with your surfboards on a Sunday, you'll get in a lot of trouble. You can get arrested. They make a big deal about it. They feel it's disrespectful. So you can still kind of get in the water, but you have to restrict what you do, because otherwise you're offending the local culture. And when you book your trip, they tell you on Sundays, you may not be surfing, just one of the days of the week.
You know, I'm thinking just on a local basis, it's kind of that same way here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first place I ever learned how to surf was Ventura.
Right.
And my brother-in-law, who lives in Santa Barbara and heading up there, And I tell people, I go, yeah, I surf in turn Oxnard. And they're like, did you get beat up? Did you get in trouble? I'm like, no, but I was respectful. I knew I was a buoy in the water. I didn't cut people off. That my brother-in-law taught me not to cut, you know what I mean? It's like, it's the same way. Like you kind of learn the local rules of the wave. Don't act like a jerk. And usually you're okay.
I have a funny story about a Silver Strand, which is one of the most localized surf spots in the world. So a couple of years, this is quite a few years ago now, me and a bunch of guys in somebody's Range Rover drive up there, a bunch of yuppies from Malibu to go surfing, like the worst kind of thing, right? So we pull up at Silver Strand, which is this blue collar, hardcore, super localized spot. Guy pulls up in like a beat up old Plymouth and he's staring at us, giving us the stink eye. And, we were all getting dressed and and you could just see the guy, we're just his sort of nightmare, a bunch of guys showing up in a group.
Yeah.
Saw the water a couple hours later and we're getting undressed. We had a good time surfing and we saw him in the water and he was really grumpy and kind of, was just really unpleasant. So I see him next to his car and he's going like this and he's leaning against the car and he's wiggling all over. So the string on the back of his wetsuit had come off and he couldn't get out of his wetsuit. So he's looking at us. He needs someone to help him get out of his wetsuit.
Yeah.
So he kind of grudgingly walks over and goes, "Hey man, I need a zip. Will you help me out?" I go, "I will help you out. But you were not very friendly when we showed up. You need to shake all our hands and say, 'Welcome to Silver Strand,' and we'll take care of your wetsuit." And there's this long pause. He's thinking, this is the worst moment of my life.
Yeah.
I've got to get out of this goddamn wetsuit and get to work or wherever he had to go. So he walked around to all five of us. "Welcome to Silver Strand. Welcome to Silver Strand." And then we took his zipper down. So I was trying to sort of say, hey, we were nice guys. We don't take a lot of waves. And I said, you don't need to scowl at us. We're respectful. We know we're guests here. So, but it was pretty funny to make them shake our hands. So.
Guys down in at Trestles were kind of, and that was my home spot. I'd hit churches in the South and all that. But, that was back in Dino days, Matt Archibald, Christian Fletcher, right. and those guys. And it was definitely localized down there. And I'm like, I'm a local. This is my spot. And I'm still getting grief from younger kids, giving me grief. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, it's a weird part of the surf culture. That's kind of why I'm going to this really relatively remote place. Yeah. And there are other surf camps there. And, it's not like there's nobody there, but it's
very few.
Time I went, about half the time we surfed with just a handful of people. So it was good.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you, how do you've done some very eclectic documentaries. I mean, the surfing makes sense now, but Unchained, and then with your X Games background,
right?
What's next? I mean,
right now I'm in the middle of post-production on a challenging but very, very exciting project called Pay Dirt: The Story of Supercross.
Okay.
And wouldn't call it the history of Supercross because documentary is not it's not an encyclopedia, right? We're not covering every single thing, but it's we've interviewed about 35 of the greatest athletes in Supercross history. We just got an interview with Bob Hanna about a week ago, who was the original superstar of the sport and a really bristly, irascible fellow. So it was a fun interview. And he's got some great stories. So that's the main project that we're doing. The travel that I have coming up, I'm also now working with two new clients. One of them is a company, it's kind of an odd one for me. It's called Kelly and Partners, and they're an accounting firm. You wouldn't imagine there's much exciting things to do with an accounting firm. Yeah. But it's a very dynamic guy named Brett Kelly, who has a publicly traded firm out of Australia. He's expanding internationally. That's how I met him in Malibu. Randomly met him in a surf shop, actually. And one thing he does every year is he takes a dozen Australian kids from high school who are not Jewish, but they take 50 kids, go through a program trying to come up with a business idea. Then they judge them, and the top 10 kids go on a trip to Israel to see the historical sites. But Israel is considered one of the most entrepreneurial driven countries in the world. Sure. A lot of startups, a lot of technology. So they take these 10 kids and they bring them around to half a dozen or so different startup companies to educate them and inspire them. And it's run through a foundation. So we're going to be doing a documentary following these kids of what they go from living, in Australia. Now, these are not, they're not from the outback or anything, but they're kids, kind of a small, controlled life in a corner of the world, suddenly being exposed to, the history going back to, whenever you want to, talk to when it goes back to, and then meeting these people and what they learn and what they experience. And this particular video is designed to follow their experiences and create a platform so Brett can get other corporations to do what he's doing. He funds this whole thing so they can have more kids. And also the whole idea is the old Mark Twain quote, I won't have it exactly, but travel is the antidote to ignorance and prejudice. That's not the exact words, but it's something to that effect.
I know, yeah.
And so that's what this guy Brett, who's this dynamic Australian accountant, who's growing his accountancy around
Don't
the
say
world.
that too often together.
You do not. And he's really an interesting character, super personality. He kind of makes a lot of headway because he is like a flamboyant, kind of, and he's an accountant. But but he's got this vision, and he wants to sort of like share that this business can be positive for people. And so we're gonna go. So I go straight there to Israel.
Yeah.
After I do this trip, first of all, for fun and some work. In fact, this trip I'm taking to the Telos Islands, I'm also working. So I made a deal with the company that owns the resort to produce a video for them about the resort. And then hopefully we'll expand into, they own a whole series of resorts around the world. And then I go straight from Israel to Tahiti for this thing with these surfers who, for the future Olympians, are going to be surfing or checking out Chopu. So we're going to do a documentary about being in Chopu for the first time and what that's like. Then I come home for 2 weeks, and then I'm getting on a plane to go to Australia, to go to Sydney for the accountant again, to flesh out the documentary we're doing on him. So in the next, 45 days, I have Indonesia, Israel, Tahiti, and then Sydney. And God knows what will come up. There's always, when it happens like this, who knows where else I may have to sneak in and go somewhere. So.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because I was about Israel being entrepreneurial and all that. I'm working with a company that makes luggage based out of Israel called Rolling.
Oh, okay.
And so they make luggage that collapses down when it's not in use.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah, so it's interesting you just said. A beach volleyball player that I interviewed is when they hooked me up with them.
I'll tell you, I think about great travel experiences. A dear friend of my wife's and a friend of mine is a gentleman named Haim Saban, S-A-B-A-N. Haim is famous for having essentially invented the Power Rangers. And he leveraged that into a company. I don't know what his bank account has it, but according to Forbes, he's worth about $4 billion. And an Israeli, self-made Israeli who's been very successful. And at the highest end of his level of success is he bought one of those super yachts. And it's like 300 feet long.
Yeah.
And, 8 people on it. So 2 years ago, me and my wife got to go for a week through the Bahamas on a super yacht. And it was incredible. Like, you wouldn't think you'd like it so much, but
I think I would.
well, you would, because it's like you put down your cup of coffee, and before the coffee's down, it's being filled up. You take a towel, you wipe your hair, and, here's a hot one, it's just, and then the food, the places, the boat had an elevator in it because it was 5 stories tall. So they had put a different table in front of each floor, so you kind of know where you are when you're on the elevator. They have every toy you could ever imagine: underwater scooters and boards and boats and, massages every day. Yeah. This particular trip was with a guy named David Foster, the famous musician.
Yeah.
And his wife, whose name I can't think of. She's Catherine. She's very famous.
Catherine McPhee. Yeah.
Catherine McPhee. So they were on the boat, and I wouldn't have thought that David Foster on his vacation would want to sing and perform. It's like his job, so to speak. But at night we would do karaoke
with him,
David Foster and Catherine McPhee.
She's quite the singer herself. Catherine McPhee's a singer.
Absolutely. So
American Idol, yeah.
And I refuse to do it because I'm a terrible singer. When you see Catherine McPhee jump up and belting out these, world class, she has the energy of an Energizer bunny. She's running all over the stateroom in the ship, singing and flipping, and at night we would have sing-alongs and David would play his greatest hits and singing his songs, and she'd sing with him, and so it was just a week in like another world, and they sent their private jet for us to fly to the Bahamas. So you're in a private jet, and you don't touch your bags. They put it in, they put the clothes away for you, and cocktail this and that, and so it was it's sort of a magical, no work. As you can tell, I work a lot. I'm always busy.
Yeah.
Am I going to be bored all day, kind of doing nothing? It was easy.
You were fine. You were okay with it.
I didn't think I'd be able, but by the time you finish breakfast and read the paper and take a little walk, oh, it's almost time for lunch, and have lunch and take a nap, do a little exercise, and then it's time for dinner, and then you're watching. They have a movie theater, of course. So and you get all the first run movies that were out in this thing. So then you have a cocktail, and then the day's gone. And it's like, wow, I'm not scheduled on the hour.
I got nothing done, but I did a lot.
And so that, in terms of travel experiences, which is unusual for me, like even when I'm booking the surf trip, I decided to book producing a video while I'm on the trip.
Yeah.
So
well, I think that's the business side of it, right? I mean, you sit there and you go, wow, I can go, it's a tax write-off, and I can maybe make a little bit of coin and still go surfing.
Exactly. So, but that,
I get that part.
That boat, it's called the Eminence, and it's just this beautiful, beautiful mega yacht. And when you saw the Russian oligarchs having all their yachts, seized during the Russian invasion, I looked at them. I go, I know what the thing about those boats. I didn't know this. I go, why is there only 8 of us? You're only allowed 8 people on those as guests, because once you get past 8 or maybe 10, I think it's the owner and his wife, and then 8 other people, it then becomes a commercial vessel. So those giant yachts have like 10 people on them, because otherwise it's crazy. And where we were in a big harbor with other mega yachts, but there were even bigger yachts that were so big they couldn't even get into the harbor, and they would have to take these beautiful speedboats in and out of the harbor when they wanted to come into.
I interviewed a guy. He was in, I think, Indonesia, in that area with his yacht, his boat, and it was getting worked on. He was going to come back, and it's a different. I mean, he's got the rock wall built into it, on it, and all that. And
yeah,
I looked it up, and I'm like, that's insane. But he's like, yeah, I'm going to be in Miami, and then I'm going to go down to the Caribbean, and then he's from Toronto, so he's flying up to Toronto, and it's a cool lifestyle.
One of the other places I've been when I think of travel, again, it was originally driven by surfing, is to go to Mexico. I used to go to Mexico many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And I did I was in Mexico, and I would go to a little surf resort that was, separated from the world, but it was near Culiacan. So we went down there one year, and we were shooting a video in the city that I was with. Some of the Mexicans were there. And in Culiacan is where the Sinaloa cartel is based. But until recently, there was no problems. But we're doing this night shoot. And we're driving back to the hotel. It's 4 a.m. I'm really tired. We've been shooting all night. We pull up to a red light. We're in a van full of people. And as we pull up to the red light, I see a red Lamborghini pull up next to us. And I look down, I go, that's kind of interesting. And I don't care.
You don't see that too often, though, in Mexico.
But yeah, again, I'm so tired. The light turns green, and the Lamborghini's sitting there, and I see the guys talking. And my driver's sitting there like this.
Yeah.
Light turns red. I go, okay, whatever. Light turns green. My driver's like this. The couple are talking. I'm going, well, vámonos, let's go. Guy doesn't respond. I keep asking. Light turns red again. I'm like, what is going on here? I want to get back to my room and go to sleep.
Yeah.
Light turns green again. After a few minutes, finally the Lamborghini goes, and then my guy goes. And I go, what was going on there? And they go, when one of those cars show up, if someone's driving a Lamborghini in a Mexican city that's where the Sinaloa cartel is based, it's basically a cartel guy.
Yeah.
And so you show them the utmost respect, that even though there's a green light, you wait for them to go first.
Or else.
Maybe or else. But enough so the guy was like, I'm yelling at him to go, and the guy's working for me, and he just stone faced.
He doesn't care.
He ain't moving. Now he knows there's no reason to go, because who knows what that guy might react.
Yeah.
That's again
that's the unknown factor of traveling, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I traveled down to Nueva Vallarta, and it was the same way. It was like we went to the checkpoint at the county line, M16s. You're like, I just want to get to there. It's like, I'm not leaving the country. I'm just going from Puerto Vallarta to Nueva Vallarta.
Yeah.
Like, no,
Yeah. It's actually, for me, it's very sad what's going on in Mexico in that regard. You know,
Yeah.
that it's a great country. I love the Mexican people. I've been there, like I said, dozens of times, and plenty of it's safe. And the Mexicans are the people that I know are really good
Great.
people, and
Yeah.
they don't like that this is how people perceive their country. But it is a bit, particularly where we were in that area, though the little surf spot, again, I'm always going somewhere for that, is protected. But still, one time we were there and a Jeep pulled up and some guys got out and they just said, just leave them alone, give them some beers and leave. But there was something a little bit strange.
Yeah.
The life down in Mexico. So,
Yeah, I had that experience when I went down. God. Well, we make all of our boots in Leon. Almost all the cowboy boots in this area are made in Leon, Mexico. And you get down there, but it's I was told to keep your money in different pockets.
That's one of the things you could do is, yep. Just be careful. That's the main thing.
And you keep your traffic code money in one pocket, your Policia money in the other pocket, and the federales, they'll take it all. They don't care. So
I've told you all my best travel stories. I'm not sure I have any other good ones left.
No, I appreciate the time, but it's always nice to catch you in between because you're going to be jumping.
I'm going to be getting those, but then that weird thing of collecting miles, like, because even though I'm a United flyer, Singapore Airlines, which I'm going to Jakarta, is part of Star Alliance.
There
and
you
on
go.
the back, I'm coming Air Nippon or ANA.
ANA, yeah.
And they're also part of Star Alliance. So I'm sort of excited that I'm going to get a lot of miles from this one trip. So that's
spoken like a true traveler. I'm the same way.
Yeah, I love. It's weird how you get those miles. You check your little totals, and am I got status yet? And
I know I got the companion pass with my wife because I did so much, so she gets to fly with me for free for the whole year. So that's a nice deal.
Well, while I have you here, let me just put in a plug for my movie.
Absolutely.
So the movie that we met at was called Groundswell: The Other Side of Fear. It's narrated by Josh Brolin, who brings a whole level. Again, he's done 3 of my movies and he's scheduled to do the 4th. His voice is just amazing and his understanding of the sports is incredible. So it's now on all. In some countries, it's still playing theatrically. So in a few countries, Australia, Spain, Portugal, and the UK, it's not available online. But everywhere else in the world, it's on Amazon and iTunes and all platforms. We have a 5-star rating and 8.2 on IMDb. So if anybody's listening and they want to see a great surf movie that covers Hawaii, where it's another whole story we could talk about sometime, Mavericks up in Northern California, and Nazare, where a guy rides a wave that's arguably 100 feet. And we tell the story, my background. It's not just a surf story, as you saw. We talked a little about the town and the village and how it came about to try to give people a context. So, but anybody's interested in a great surf documentary, Groundswell: The Other Side of Fear.
At the premiere, I sat down next to this girl and I'm like, okay, I don't know who she is. We're talking, all of a sudden I'm like, hey, that's Bianca. That's the girl. And she just won. I stayed in touch with her and she just won again up in Maverick. So
yeah, she did fantastic. She's actually just posted Puerto Escondido, Mexico. She got some bomb waves down there. She's really hardcore, but very, very sweet, as you could tell from
she's super nice. I mean, you would never, the Tori's the same way. We ended up talking to Tori. I'm like, dude, you got to go, man. This is he goes, because we start talking about cowboys and this and that, but.
Right. Yeah. And that was fun to have a story to tell in a surf movie that was a little different with the bull riding and his background and the Texas background. And that's part of the fun of doing these documentaries. You come across people who have stories that you're not, fully aware of.
Well, that's what I love about my show,
Yeah.
It's like I said, a Jewish guy from New York to going to Africa and different islands, and that's cool. So appreciate the time. Groundswell's out, and we'll stay in touch, and maybe I'll hit you up in a year or so, and we'll see when your next movie's coming out.
Right, that'd be great. But absolutely.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
All right, buddy.
Bye-bye.